In Walmart's Who Newville, everyone ready their cart. Amazing Black Friday deals are about to start. Online and in the app, such great deals to explore. Everything you love from tech, toys, and more. The days to save and the ones to remember. It's only the 25th to the 30th of November. Set your alarms. Don't miss out. These deals are epic, without a doubt. The Who's are all ready, but are you? Walmart Black Friday deals await. Who knew?
Oh, Hilton stay, your beds are soft and cozy. No lumpy couch, no stiff futon, no shower line at crack of dawn. Oh, Hilton stay.
When you want holiday comfort you can count on, it matters where you stay. Enjoy comfortable rooms and friendly service when you stay with Hilton instead. Save up to 25% this season when you book with Hilton. Hilton for the stay. Terms apply.
If you're a hardline communist, well, that's kind of frowned upon. You won't get invited to dinner parties. But if you're really funny, then people will, because it's just a joke, isn't it? We live in this country that has had a parliamentary democracy since the 12th or 13th century. We've got a constitutional monarchy, we've got an empire. Britain isn't going to go communist. Therefore, you can laugh at it, like fascists. People laughed at fascists because of their silly moustaches, pointy shoes, and kind of flared breeches. It's just ridiculous. They're parvenus.
Welcome to the Spymasters podcast. I'm your host, Antonia Senior. I'm a writer and journalist, and it's my mission to bring you all the best spy writers to the podcast to talk about their craft, facts and fiction, historical and contemporary. This week's guest is Alec Marsh. Alec is a journalist and a writer of wonderful historical thrillers, which have been described as a mashup of P.G. Wodehouse and Indiana Jones. We're talking about After the Flood, the fourth in his series about 1930s amateur sleuths, Drabble and Harris. The series has attracted some stellar fans, including Ian Rankin, who called them a rollicking good read. We'll talk about the 1930s, about Istanbul, and about the age of the amateur. We've got more treats coming up on the Spymasters podcast, including a talk with I.S. Berry, the CIA officer turned crime writer, about her brilliant debut, The Peacock and the Sparrow. So follow us, subscribe, tell your friends, never miss an episode of Spymasters. And now I'll hand you over to me, talking to Alec about After the Flood. Alec, thank you so much for coming on the Spymasters podcast. I'm absolutely delighted to have you on.
Well, and it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
We're here to talk about your latest novel, the fourth instalment of your brilliant series about a kind of adventurous duo in the 1930s called Drabble and Harris. Could you just fill the listeners in a little bit on their latest adventure? Where are they? What are they up to? What's going on?
Oh, with pleasure, yeah. Okay, so the new book is called After the Flood, and it's set, principally, the action starts in Istanbul, and it's 1938. And Ernest Drabble, who is he's a historian of late medieval, early modern history at Cambridge, and he's an amateur mountaineer, and he arrives in Istanbul with his brand new wife Charlotte. It's their honeymoon, but because he's a man of his time, naturally his best man comes along as well for the ride, and that's a character called Harris, who is a slightly alcoholic Fleet Street journalist, and he comes along, and so there's the three of them arrive in Istanbul on a honeymoon. And very quickly, the wheels start to fall off the wagon. There's an apparent break-in in Harris's suite, and then horror upon horror for a honeymoon. The bride, let's say the new wife, disappears, and quickly the three of them are sucked into a conspiracy that, since it's 1938, will affect the course of the future of Turkey, but also have implications for the world at large.
It's so much fun. I can't recommend it highly enough. It felt to me a little bit. I know you've had accusations at all of being a bit before of being a bit Woodhouseian, but it felt to me a little bit like P.G. Wodehouse meets Indiana Jones, and I think that can only be a brilliant thing.
Well, thank you very much. That, believe it or not, that is the stated intention of the kind of the setup. I don't know if there's a massive reading public for that, but certainly I love it, and I think you have to on a certain level right for yourself and hope others enjoy it with you. So yeah.
It's very, very funny. I absolutely adored particularly the early setups where the three of them are sort of embarking on a honeymoon all together, and the kind of comedic value of going on honeymoon with a slightly alcoholic journalist just tagging along for reasons you're not entirely sure why. I thought that was wonderful. Could you just, obviously this is the fourth book in the series, so new readers could happily begin here but might want to start at the beginning. Can you just sort of fill us in a little bit more about who Drabble and Harris are, and how the series sort of begins and kind of travels through the 30s?
Absolutely, yeah. Okay, so Drabble and Harris, Ernest Drabble is, as I said, he's a professor of history at Cambridge. He's had a lifelong passion in climbing and mountaineering, and he has been a communist in his youth. His old school friend, this is like 1930s, these people went to boarding schools, this is the nature of who they are, is Percival Harris. He despises his first name, so it's never ever used, and he's just simply called Harris. And he is a gossip columnist on a London newspaper with the London Evening News. And he gets up to various things and interviews people and all the rest of it. And as you've said, he does like to drink, and he also has a great difficulty in not saying the thoughts that come to his mind. And whereas, thank goodness, his friend Ernest Drabble has the capability to pause and reflect. And the other problem with Harris is he has noble intentions, but he's extremely weak. So he will always give in, and he's not to be trusted with any information whatsoever. So they're the core duo. They've appeared in 3 previous books. The first one was set in December 1936, and it was called Rule Britannia, and that was set against the abdication crisis. And then the second one, a few months later, is set in British India and is called Enemy of the Raj. And Drabble and Harris go to India because Harris can see the way that India is going. He knows independence is coming, and he doesn't want to be the last Harris in 150 years not to shoot his own tiger, and so that's why he goes. And of course, which allows for a very amusing opening scene in which a vicious man-eating tiger might come to a sticky end, but never mind. It deserves it. And then the third book is called Ghosts in the West. And that is a little bit of a Western, and it starts with robberies at the British Museum in London, and then quickly moves to the Midwest of America for a kind of a story that spans time, and also, like all of these stories, brings up questions about the past and the present and how these two things come together. In the course of that third story, Ghosts of the West, Ernest falls in love with a fellow historian he meets on the passage to America called Charlotte Moore. And at the end of the book, not a spoiler alert because, maybe it's a spoiler. Well, anyway, it's done now. In the end of the book, they get engaged, and because she has to live to tell the tale, otherwise she couldn't be in book 4. And so book 4 begins with their honeymoon in Istanbul.
The characters, I love the duo. I love the double act. It's very, very funny. I also love the conceit that the brilliant, cool-headed man of action is the academic historian, and the kind of slightly hapless, useless one is a journalist. And having trying to inhabit both roles in my life, I like the fact. I love that sort of duality. I think it works brilliantly.
Thank you. The what I'd say about the two of them is that Harris is also a man of his time. And he's therefore he thinks like, well, so the empire is a good thing, that kind of stuff. And Drabble is, as I said, he's kind of left wing, he's progressive, and he's to a certain degree a man who makes aspects of the past palatable to the present. So he also challenges Harris on the status quo, and so you have this ability to investigate and question the past, which is quite fun too.
Yeah, I want to talk a little bit about the 1930s backgrounds, but in a minute. But let's just start with the setting of the novel, because all of your Drabble and Harris books are kind of located very firmly in a place, and this one is Istanbul. So I wanted to ask, why Istanbul? I mean, I find it a fascinating city anyway. And obviously, this is a spy podcast. And when one of your characters, Harris, goes for a drink in a hotel bar very early on, one of the characters says to him, "You're smack bang in the middle of the right place for gossip in Istanbul at the Pera Palace." Pera? I don't know. Pera Palace. You know, they used to hang a sign on the wall here asking spies to give up their seats for proper patrons of the hotel. Is that a true story?
It's true. It's true. So the Pera Palace Hotel is still a great grand hotel, and it obviously was, as you probably know, frequented by Mata Hari, Ernest Hemingway, Agatha Christie stayed there when she wrote Murder on the Orient Express. Mustafa Kemal Ataturk has a suite there named after him, and I'm not sure if anyway, I won't go into that part of the story. So it's one of those glorious hotels, world hotels. And it was the kind of heart of a place that used to be called Pera and is now renamed with a Turkish name, Beyoğlu. And it's kind of where you go. And there's a wonderful book, which I read many years ago, called Midnight at the Pera Palace by a guy called Charles King. And it's really about, as he says there, the birth of modern Istanbul. And in that, he reveals that there was a sign on the wall saying, "If you're not a proper customer, if you're just spying on people, please leave or give up your seat." And of course, this is because Istanbul, I was trying to find the words for it. In the book, it says, it's not just the meeting of East and West, it's the meeting of North and South. But it's also the meeting of religions. It's the meeting of kind of worldviews and outlooks. And at this time in this place, it's a neutral power. And you've got the Soviet Union there. You've got, obviously, Nazi Germany, and the rise of Mussolini and other kind of fascist dictatorships. You've got sort of a pretty sticky situation in the Balkans. Obviously, the British Empire is a fact of life. But between British India and other positions in Africa. So it's kind of at the centre of the world, as it still is. And so why did I set the book there? Well, there's three reasons, really. First of all, I wanted a story that sequentially fit with the series, and I wanted them to go on honeymoon together. I wanted Charlotte to be an equal member of the story because I think that would just improve the dynamic of it, rather than having two chaps, having a third person. For reasons that become apparent in the book, it also adds jeopardy to the story, which is effective. And then the real reason is, I thought, so they need to go on honeymoon somewhere. Come on, who doesn't like railway travel? But they could have gone anywhere. But the other real reason is that I lived in Istanbul in 2015. My wife and I lived there for about 11 months. And so I've tramped around the city, seen a bit of the interior of the country and loved it. And I was standing, shortly after I got married, we were in Eminönü, which is just down the hill from Sultanahmet, which is where the Blue Mosque is, and the Hagia Sophia is top of her palace. And I was there on the jetty waiting for a ferry, and these thousands of people deluged off a ferry, and I realised how easy it would be to lose the people you're with in this situation, in this massive metropolis where you don't know the language, where it's very mysterious, where actually it's divided by water, where you've got so many different cultures and religions. And there's also kind of seedy parts to it, which tourists never go to, because basically, you just know you don't go there. So I just thought, what a fantastic story. What a great place to set a mystery that then has tentacles to kind of global conspiracy and all those other things set in 1938.
Those kind of neutral countries as the world is sliding to war is so fascinating, aren't they? Because they do become kind of hotbeds of kind of intrigue, and it's the place where you can actually meet your counterpart from from somewhere that's ideologically opposed to you. It is a fascinating milieu. I can see why you went there.
Yes, if you think of Casablanca, the power of that film, or think of Portugal and the role of Portugal in the Second World War as a kind of jetting off point, or Norway, that great scene at the end of The Wooden Horse, where the escapees meet, former, like the Gauleiter or something in a hotel, and they sort of joke, "Oh, he thinks we shouldn't be here." Something that's quite funny, and they raise their glasses in lofty abuse. I mean, at some point, I would like Drabble and Harris to inhabit the war, and so that will be, I'm delighted to say, territory that at some point we'll tread. You never know.
Yeah, that I can very much imagine them. We'll for reasons we'll get to in a second. But I just wanted to talk about the fact that you kind of play with people's expectations about, you know, what's happening in Istanbul quite a lot, because there are a number of kind of quite dodgy characters who come in and out of the book, and you raise the reader's expectations that they may or may not work for intelligence, and you're not quite sure which intelligence services they work for. So this isn't like an actual traditional spy novel, but one of the reasons I wanted to talk to you about it, apart from the fact I love the novel, is that I think you do that atmosphere very well, of that kind of, you know, people operating in the shadows and you're not quite sure who's who and why they're there, you know, having that sort of kind of spooky in the kind of, you know, spook sense of the word, that spooky atmosphere, I think works really well as a sort of backdrop for what you're trying to do in the novel.
I think at the heart of it is that ambiguity, isn't it? Who are they? What are they doing? Are they or aren't they? I don't want to kind of spoil it for readers, but, you know, on the whole, the spooks in the story are amateurs, aren't they? And there's a couple who are more closely involved. But, you know, if you think of John Buchan is the kind of, you know, the amateur spook. You know, he gets, you know, Richard Hannay gets called in by Bullivant or whatever, and he gets summoned and says, right, there's a situation over here. We need you to go and help us out with it. Now, I mean, that's definitely where they're located. And in the kind of, and Drabble is a kind of accidental individual in this. So in the first book, you know, he's the everyman who gets sucked into an intrigue, but then he becomes an active player in trying to resolve it. And that's essentially what happens in all of them. You know, so it's not, whereas obviously with Bond, it's the mission, and with other, you know, other books of let's call it the professional end. So it's definitely located in the amateur end. I think that's fun, because in a peculiar way, when people have multiple identities and occupations, it makes it more of a muddle.
Absolutely. And I thought that was really also indicative of the period, the 1930s, because it's sort of the age of amateurs, isn't it? There's still very few people working specifically for actual intelligence agencies. It's all kind of, you know, it's the chapocracy, isn't it? You're kind of doing your mate a favour here and there. And it was interesting you were saying that Drabble and Harris are going to be potentially moving into the war, because it's exactly people like them who start getting recruited by those kind of British wartime agencies that flourish, like SOE and SIS, whatever. So it seems to me that it was quite interesting that you portrayed this age of amateurs quite so brilliantly. I loved that element of it.
Well, thank you. I mean, it does derive from taking great pleasure in reading kind of books set against that kind of milieu. So whether it's, I know it's not quite the same, but take Rogue Mail by Geoffrey Household. Yeah, what a absolutely astonishing piece of kind of concentrated writing. And of course, you know, for those who don't know, you know, it's about a guy on the run he's been abroad to shoot a Germanic dictator, and then he's being pursued, and he's a freebooter. And of course, this is then a book which inspires Rambo and First Blood in the 1970s, which is just like an astonishing connection. You know, James Fox or Edward Fox isn't anywhere near it. You know, so I think that amateurism is definitely fun, and I'm always struck by that fact that, you know, in 1909, you know, the guy in charge of British intelligence, had, you know, approximately 9 people to engage and protect an empire of 1 billion people, you know, and it was all just amateurs.
That's amazing, isn't it? That's an incredible thing, and sort of people kind of making it up on the hoof, and yet a lot of them did it so brilliantly as well. I mean, that's the other thing that always astonishes me, that even though it was all amateur and off on the hoof, it was just competent.
Yes,
apart from when it wasn't, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the life, I mean, you know, without, it's obviously a well-trodden path, but there's obviously like the life of Ian Fleming, which is rather fascinating. And the way that he went from being a banker, and not a very good banker, a very stockbrokers in the city, and then that segued into him getting a job in intelligence because they needed to move gold out of France. You know that story, everyone knows, and that then got him sucked into, and I think he's an exemplar really of that amateurism that became professional during the war, and then helped construct kind of professional infrastructure that we kind of know today.
With new, gentler scented Clorox disinfecting wipes, clean finally smells as good as it feels. On everything from lamps to ceiling fans. Even on your kid's toy shark. Oh, ouch. Clorox disinfecting wipes. Now available in... Ooh, crisp lemon. Find it on Amazon. Clorox. Clean feels good.
Meet the computer you can talk to. With Copilot on Windows, working, creating, and collaborating is as easy as talking. Got writer's block? Share your screen with Copilot Vision to help spark inspiration, and use Copilot Voice to have a conversation and brainstorm ideas. Or maybe you need some tech help. With Copilot Vision, Copilot sees what you see. Let Copilot talk you through step-by-step guidance so you can master new apps, games, and skills faster. Try now at windows.com/Copilot.
I did wonder whether your decision to make Drabble a professional historian might have sort of fed into this kind of age of amateur stuff, because it is quite often the academics that are the first to be kind of headhunted into the more professional agencies as they began to set up. Do you think there's a link between being a historian and eventually being an intelligence agent, or is that just a sort of potential lucky happenstance?
I think, I mean, the whole thing about the tap on the shoulder, which takes place at university, and then you end up, I think in my case, it's a coincidence, but also because I wanted, first and foremost, I wanted Drabble to be someone who solves occasionally historical puzzles, and therefore having access to the learning that is quite useful for deciphering a language, or that having access to the knowledge that's required, or in the first book, just being the right man to be at the heart of the mystery, which is kind of how that started. But I think it is coincidental. On the other hand, we know that Oxbridge was apart from the kind of the crossword pages of the Times and the Daily Telegraph, we know that Oxbridge was a kind of a breed, not a nursery for all these spooks, and a lot of them continued to work in a purely amateur fashion, didn't they? Spying on each other, keeping an eye on things, because of course we're talking about a time when Oxbridge, to a greater degree than it is now, was the sort of the nursery for the people who would run the empire, and therefore, you've got to keep an eye on these people.
Your characters, when they're in Istanbul, they meet a guy who one of them was friends with at Oxford, whose name is Andrew Street.
Yeah.
Who is one of these slightly sort of interesting figures. He's deliberately ambiguous, I think. Was he modelled on anyone particularly? He struck me as being quite Philby-ish. I don't know if I'm just projecting because I read so much about Philby.
I mean, everything about Andrew Street, and by this fictitious character, because I have a friend called Andrew Street who's an English teacher, and so I do occasionally love doing it. But everything about him is ambiguous. Is he straight? Is he gay? What are his politics? What are his loyalties? Why is he doing this job when he was regarded as the most brilliant man in his year and could have the pick of any occupation? So that's he's deliberately set up in this to beg questions of people, and what are most importantly, what are his motivations vis-a-vis Drabble and Harris, and of course the readers find out.
Just as a disclaimer, I'm quite enmeshed in the 1930s because I'm writing something about the Cambridge Five now. And one of the things that always strikes me, there's quite a lot of talk about how the Cambridge Five were protected because of the class that they were and becoming part of the establishment. But it does occur to me when I read a lot of the stuff about them, part of the reason that they were protected is because actually quite a lot of their lives were outside the cultural norms, right? So it wasn't just that they conformed, but they were just really good fun. They were really charming. They like, people enjoyed their company. They wanted them at their drinks parties, even though they were going to be a bit outrageous. And actually, it seemed to me that the establishment can protect people who are quite anti-establishment as long as they're a good laugh. Right, and as long as you want to have what's the cocktail that Harris drinks all the time, a sidecar, with them. And I just felt like your characters play very much into that milieu, because there's sort of, even the sort of dodgy ones are quite charming, and they're polished and they're a laugh, and then occasionally with Andrew Street, something slips and you see something else. And I just thought that was kind of playing into that sort of 1930s milieu quite well.
Well, thank you. And that is deliberate. And I think, that you're right. Because this is the thing about 30s. It's a time of secrets, isn't it? It's a period of secrets. So whether your secret, is your sexuality, which is illegal and have you sent to prison. And of course, people were openly gay, but only within certain strata of society and only within certain agreed parameters. That's something which obviously we struggle to apprehend today, but it's a fact of life then. And so that's one thing. But then another is, as you say, your politics. If you're a hardline communist, well, that's kind of frowned upon. You won't get invited to dinner parties. But if you're really funny, then people will, because it's just a joke, isn't it? We live in this country that has had a parliamentary democracy since the 12th or 13th century. We've got a constitutional monarchy. We've got an empire. Britain isn't going to be a communist. Therefore, you can laugh at it, like fascists. People laughed at fascists because they're silly moustaches, pointy shoes, and kind of flared breeches. It's just ridiculous. They're parvenus. Woodhouse, what did he call them? He called the brown shorts, didn't he? That's people just laughed at this stuff. But also laughing at it betrays a kind of, bear with me, but I think a kind of psychological fragility of the era as well. Because, we speak differently now. We speak for a different part of our voices. And it's not just because of Netflix. We are different people now because we're not stiff-ass Brits as we were then. And people, they live their lives at a different level of psychological engagement. And that has a bearing on the kind of that secrecy and the barriers and differences and the way people engage, I think.
Oh gosh, that's so interesting. So I sort of seen the 1930s as interesting because there were these massive ideological divides. But do you think that there's something else going on that because these class of men particularly, they're all sort of uptight, boarding school, empire, stiff upper lip. They're all pissed all the time. They drink so much. It's unbelievable. So they're all sort of drunk and repressed. And do you think this is sort of feeding into that kind of general milieu and the secrets and the lies and the...
Absolutely, because what is it all about? It's about governing yourself. It's about governing the human condition, and it's about keeping a lid on unspoken wants or essentially repression. And I think it's in a weird way, where does fascism come from? Well, it was said, wasn't it, that I don't remember if it was H.P. Taylor, I can't remember, but someone said that, the First World War, wouldn't have happened if Europe hadn't been quite so sexually repressed. Before First World War, this is an era where, women vacating seats, a man wouldn't occupy the seat until the heat had left the top of the seat, right? Or because of the intimacy, or, the piano legs were curtained for fear of, arousing excessive ardor. We have, the level of kind of repression, sexual repression in the Victorian era. Anyway, it's a fanciful idea. I don't know if I buy into it, but that's where we've come from. They're right. There might well be something in the kind of repression, the cultural or social repression that led to that it fed into things like Nazism, the uniforms, the strutting. It's very hard from our perspective now not to read back on it. And that is something to which they were not psychologically available themselves. They couldn't see that. That was something that the door was well and truly closed on that. And that, that's quite one of the interesting things about revisiting these periods, because you can, in a way the historian can't, because obviously they should stick to the truth or the facts. If you're a novelist, you can take the kind of modern idea and overlay on the past and help that to shed a light on or open or ask interesting questions.
I do like the way that Harris is kind of more old school and Drabble's kind of got one eye on modernity, and that does work really well. But I do like the fact that Harris does think like a man of his times, because apart from anything else, it's sometimes very, very funny. But also, it gives you more of a sense, I think, of the type of men that we're talking about, who, as you say, are not modern men. There's one bit where he sleeps with a woman who's unbelievably gorgeous, and he can't quite work out why she slept with him. So he worries that she might be a prostitute, and then he sort of says to himself, well, if she is, she's a bloody good one. And it's just all of it, and it's very, very funny. I've sort of described it very badly.
He retreats to a completely logical explanation, which is that she is a perfect exemplar of Adam Smith's division of labor concept, and that therefore, it's a thing to be worshipped.
Absolutely. It's very funny, and I love the way he thinks. And I do think, and it is funny as well that he's pissed all the time, because that is something that, reading a lot about the 30s, I cannot get my head around. I mean, I have always been an enthusiastic imbiber, but I mean, a complete amateur compared to these guys. I mean, when we meet Harris, he's drinking. There's one bit where he's in a bar and it's lunchtime and he's drinking cocktails, and then he sort of wonders to himself idly whether he's just going to segue straight into the pre-dinner drinks or whether he might take a break. Oh, I just thought that. And from what I've read around the 1930s, this is absolutely part of the course. This is not, he's not necessarily considered to be an outlier on the booze front.
No, I mean, so before I started writing these books, I mean, there was a time in my life, and I don't think I'd ever read a book written after 1970, kind of period of my life where I read, you work through Evil and War, you work through The Dance to the Music of Time, and if you get really racy, you read some Hemingway, also Fitzgerald, but then you're back to the Graham Greene and Kingsley Amis, bit late, bit modern, but I mean, there's amongst all that, there's one book called Afternoon Men, which I don't know if anyone's read it, but it's by Anthony Powell. He wrote it before he went on to dance, and it's written about 1932. And essentially, it's men behaving badly for posh people in the 30s, and they're called Afternoon Men. And I think it's because that's what they were called, because they only got up in the afternoon, and they're basically on their uppers, living kind of about Soho. And they go and get pissed, and they go to house parties, and dreadful things happen. They sleep with girls. And basically what it's describing amongst an elite culture, in inverted commas, is the kind of sort of behaviour that became normal from the 60s. And that's kind of what, if you think about Mitford and you think about all these authors, the kind of lifestyle that the kind of top 3% had in the 20s and 30s is the lifestyle, we'll call it liberation in terms of sexual activity, but also things like divorce. That becomes a kind of mass cultural experience, isn't it? So it was quite interesting. Anyway, and then think of Hangover Square. There's a great line in Hangover Square where the main character realizes that at 8 drinks you're drunk, and he's on 6. And I think, like you, I mean, I'm not saying like you, but I used to be a gossip columnist, from which Harris's own experience is drawn, mingled with kind of reading enough, Bright Young Things, enough books set in that time. And, how much you can drink, and you do keep a count on it because you've got to be able to function. And whether that's driving your car home, because, in the 1930s, Evil and War was done for drink driving, and everyone was done for drink driving. When it was still okay to be done for drink driving, but it is an era soaked with booze, and we know that. Think of Gatsby, that kind of thing. And that was in a country where it was illegal.
Yeah, absolutely. So you've mentioned there some of your big sort of the people that you read. Have you got any other big literary influences when you're writing these books?
Oh, God. Well, I think so. The big category of books that are really obviously influential, aside from the ones that just barge through, are it's obviously Le Carré, right? Because you don't strut into this sort of period without that. And of course, I'm not a person to say if there's any similarity at all, because I don't think there is. It's not meant to be. But nonetheless, the world he's created, is to espionage what Tolkien is to fantasy, isn't it? It's so all-embracing. Like, how do you do a fantasy novel without elves now? Well, or little people with beards. You can't. You're going to struggle, aren't you?
Or you at least have to know you have to know him in order to depart from him. I think it's the same, right? He's the bedrock from which you have to make decisions about where you're going to go.
Exactly. So I think, so for me, I think obviously there's Ian Fleming, Bond. There's Graham Greene, the Honorary Consul, and then you've got Le Carré, you've got the Honourable Schoolboy, which is just a fantastic, Call for the Dead, and Bio Came In From the Cold, Alec Lemus. It's wonderful to discover a book where there's a person called Alec. It's lovely. I think for the kind of more modern times, because I realised at some point in the last 20 years to write books for people who are reading now, I might actually need to do some research and see how people write books now, rather than just do a strange copy of a book written in the 30s. Like, anyway, so I mean, Tim Glister writes amazing spy novels set in the 60s, and which I love. I think differently but similar, Abir Mukherjee writes, these are big names now, but he writes these sort of lovely detective stories set in Bengal in the 20s. But, they're essentially crime stories, but the nature of it, some of it becomes political crime. So, and they, because of the setting and his background, they ask really interesting questions about the morality of the time, what we're doing. And they're good. And then, of course, Wasim Khan writes beautiful books set in the 50s Bombay. They're it's good to spend time with his detective. I mean, this is part of the problem. There's so much good stuff out there. Well, as a writer, how do you break through? This is the question.
It's one of the problems. Is living in a golden age is great for readers, not so good for writers.
and then of course, but then to step away for a second, if you take all those things, then you shake the ice, the cocktail shaker, and sort of pour out P.G. Wodehouse on top of it. Yeah, and then you take decades of watching, let's face it, things like Indiana Jones or kind of the Bond movies on screen, well, Bond movies rather than books, and just add on all those other sort of silly things. You end up, comic books. Part of Harris's brain resides in these small A5 comic books that existed when I was a child, called like Commando. Right?
Yes.
Yeah, and I couldn't really, in the 80s, they were still producing these, and they'd have storylines about Tommies doing amazing things with kind of speech bubbles saying, "Eat lead and die, Fritz," and things like this, which is just like astonishing. And now, I mean, I think they do exist, but I suspect the storylines are, oh yeah, and now they're going on a humanitarian mission to save some refugees. It might be different, I don't know. All that stuff basically piles into it.
There's one bit I remember reading in the book which made me actually guffaw out loud, where Harris is, I don't know, in some terrible scrape and he's being, held hostage by some terrible villain, and he shouts back at the villain something like, "Get out of it, cake face." Actually completely
because he naturally would give these people nicknames because they don't tell him his name, and he would seek to find an amusing angle on it to cheer himself up. But this is it, booze and laughter and cigarettes are how people got through World War One, and largely how they got through the Second World War. Gallows humour, and I think that's part of that part of their era as well.
So where next for Drabble and Harris? World War II, we think, or have we got an adventure before it all kicks off? What do you think?
So After the Flood takes place in May 1938, and as I said, the backdrop to it is what's happening in Turkey, and so. And what happens? What is happening is that the man who's founded Turkey and ruled Turkey since 1920, a man called Mustafa Kemal Ataturk, is on the slide. He's dying. And so, what happens next in Turkey? And so that's this one. The next one is going to be set against the backdrop of the Munich crisis, and it starts off with Drabble, I think, in Prague Castle in an archive. And he makes an astonishing discovery.
Wow, that sounds brilliant. I think that's a fantastic note on which to end. I will look forward to that. And Alec, just to say, I highly recommend your books to everybody. They're very funny and very thrilling, and everything that you want a read to be. And thank you so much for coming on Spymasters.
Antonia, thank you very much for having me.
Thank you for listening. Don't forget to follow, tweet, spread the word so that we can keep bringing you more brilliant writers talking about spies. Don't miss an episode of the Spymasters podcast.
Hey, Ryan Reynolds here, wishing you a very happy half-off holiday, because right now Mint Mobile is offering you the gift of 50% off unlimited. To be clear, that's half price, not half the service. And Mint is still premium unlimited wireless for a great price. So that means a half day, yeah? Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month plan, equivalent to $15 per month required. New customer offer for first 3 months only. Speed slow after 35 gigabytes if network's busy. Taxes and fees extra. See mintmobile.com.